Good morning, 5th grade. Today we're going to continue reading in Chapter 3 of Esperanza Rising. Before we get started, you have a quick write. It says, has someone ever made you feel like you weren't good enough because you didn't have as much money or things as they did? What did the person say or do to make you feel that way? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. It says, how are Esperanza and Miguel different from one another? And our standard that we're working on is using metaphors to explain the class difference between Miguel's life and Esperanza's. Our vocabulary words are social class, and that is the division between people who are wealthy and people who are poor. Corrupt, it means someone who is dishonest and they make deals for their own personal gain and not for what's best for everyone. And then the last one is sensitive. It's when you're easily offended or upset. Go ahead and turn the page. We're going to begin reading on page 34. And remember, Tia Louise has just asked Mama to marry him. And she has said no. So we're at the top of page 34. We're going to use our CSPS strategy. That evening, Hortensia and Alfonso sat with Mama and Abuelita discussing the problem. Esperanza paced and Miguel quietly looked on. Will the income from the grapes be enough to support the house and the servants? Asked Mama. Maybe, said Alfonso. Then I will stay in my home, said Mama. Do you have any other money? Asked Alfonso. I have money in the bank, announced Abuelita. And then more quietly she added, Luis's bank. He would prevent you from taking it out, said Hortensia. If you need help, we could borrow money from our friends, from Senor Rodriguez, said Esperanza. We'll stop right there. We have information about the characters and the setting. And we know at the top of the page that everyone is sitting around and they're talking about what they're going to do next. Now that Tia Louise has threatened them, they are trying to figure out what the next steps are. So in box 1, we would write Esperanza, Hortensia, Mama, Abuelita, Alfonso, and Miguel all talk at night about what to do next. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. You can write down this quote at the top of page 34. That evening, Hortensia and Alfonso sat with Mama and Abuelita discussing the problem. Esperanza paced and Miguel quietly looked on. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the setting. Our setting changes in a moment after our problem, so we're going to fill that in a second. We're in the middle of the page. They're trying to figure out how they're going to get money. Your uncles are very powerful and corrupt, said Alfonso. They can make things difficult for anyone who tries to help you. Remember, they are the banker and the mayor. The conversation continued to go in circles. Esperanza finally excused herself. She walked out to Papa's garden and sat on the stone bench. Many of the roses had dropped their petals, leaving the stem and the rosehip, the green grapefruit-like fruit of the rose. We'll stop right there. So in our setting, Esperanza she's become frustrated by the conversation, and she walks outside into the rose garden. And so in box 2, you would write, Esperanza became frustrated and walked outside to Papa's rose garden. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, we would write down the sentence at the bottom of page 34. She walked out to Papa's garden and sat on a stone bench. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the problem. And for the problem, Esperanza and her family are trying to figure out how they are going to be able to make money to support themselves with Papa gone. They're trying to figure out how they're going to be able to stay at El Rancho de las Rosas, even though Papa is gone. And Tia Louise doesn't want them to. And so in box 3, we would write, Esperanza and her family are afraid that they won't be able to get away from their uncles because one owns the bank and the other is the mayor. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. You would write down this quote in the middle of page 34. Your uncles are very powerful and corrupt, said Alfonso. They can make things difficult for anyone who tries to help you. Remember, they are the banker and the mayor. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. We're at the top of page 35. Abuelita said the rosehip contained the memories of the roses, and that when you drank tea made from it, you took in all the beauty that the plant had known. These roses have known Papa, she thought. She would ask Hortensia to make rosehip tea tomorrow. Miguel found her in the garden and sat beside her. Since Papa died, he had been polite, but still had not talked to her. Anza, he said, using her childhood name, which rose is yours? In recent years, his voice had become a deep throttle. She hadn't realized how much she missed hearing it. The sound brought tears to her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She pointed to the miniature pink blooms with delicate stems that climbed up the trellises. And where is mine? Asked Miguel, nudging her like he did when they were younger and told each other everything. Esperanza smiled and pointed to the orange starburst next to it. They had been young children the day Papa had planted one for each of them. What does it all mean, Miguel? There are rumors in town that Luis intends to take over the ranch, one way or another. Now that seems true. We will probably leave for the United States to work. Esperanza shook her head as if to say no. She could not imagine living without Hortensia, Alfonso, and Miguel. My father lost faith in our country. We were born servants here, and no matter how hard we work, we will always be servants. Your father was a good man. He gave us a small piece of land and a cabin. But your uncles, you know their reputation. They would take it all away and treat us like animals. We will not work for them. The work is hard in the United States, but at least we have a chance to be more than servants. But Mama and Abuelita, we need you. My father says we won't leave until it's necessary. He reached over and took her hand. I'm sorry about your Papa. His touch was warm, and Esperanza's heart skipped. She looked at her hand in his and felt the color rushing to her face. Surprised at her own blush, she pulled away from him. She stood and stared at the roses. An awkward silence built a wall between them. She glanced quickly at him. He was still looking at her with eyes full of hurt. Before Miguel left her there, he said softly, "You were right, Esperanza. In Mexico, we stand on different sides of the river." All right, we're going to stop right there because we have information about the solution. It says now one way that Miguel and his family are going to solve their problem is by going to the United States to work. And so in box 4, you would write, Miguel and his family might move to the United States because they know Tia Louise will not treat them as well as Papa. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the quote. And for the quote, we would write down this quote on page 36. It says, "Now that it seems true, we will probably leave for the United States to work." Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. All right, for the paragraph, it says, how does Esperanza react to her father's death? What does this reveal about her character? And so you need to think about the discussion that they're having because that discussion is in response to Papa's death. And how does she react to this discussion, and what does that tell you about her?